Hey guys, welcome back. It's time for part 8 of how to build a blog with Laravel. We're really making progress and we're just cruising right along. So in this video, I'm actually super psyched about this one. This is going to be a lot of fun because we start working with our database. So we've been talking about creating a blog. We've created the structure for the blog. We're using Blade to organize all that. Now it's time to actually start storing posts, which are basically that's what blogs are all about, are writing blog posts. We're going to start storing those into a database. And we're going to talk about how to set up our database in this part. And then in the next part, we're actually going to start saving posts to the database. So we got a really good episode coming up, guys. Stay tuned. Okay, so it's been you guys are just really doing good at this. I'm really happy with the how everyone's responding to this. I'm getting really good feedback. People are emailing me, tweeting me, leaving comments, and really everyone seems to be having a really good time learning along. So this is a really fun episode for me because we're going to start working with our models. And we talked about before, we had the model view and the controller aspect going on in this with Laravel. And up till this point, we've been working with the controllers and the views. So the C and the V, or the V and the C, I guess, MVC. So the V and the C, and I said the models are coming soon, the M. Well, now it's time to work with the models, okay? So before we get started with models, I want to, first of all, talk about databases. Now, hopefully you guys have some understanding of databases, but if you haven't, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of databases. There is a lot more to learn, I'm sure, but I want to give the bare minimum needed for this course just to make sure everyone's up to speed. And then we will probably and then we're just going to go from there and start working on the ones in Laravel. But I just want to have something so that everyone is on the same page as far as what a database is from a very high level, okay? And you might, if you find this interesting, you might want to look into researching some more. And I'm thinking about doing a video series down the road, not like right now, all about MySQL, which is the database we'll be using, but all databases carry the same structure. I like to relate a database to a spreadsheet. That seems to be what works to a lot of people because most people have worked with a spreadsheet in the past. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot of similarities between a database and a spreadsheet. Databases are obviously designed to be programmatically accessed and retrieved, set and get, but they're very similar to a spreadsheet. Now, let me just go ahead. We're going to kind of create what we would create our posts table for a database. We're going to create that here in a spreadsheet so I can kind of show you what I mean, how it works. Now, first thing you need to know is a little vocabulary on when we talk about databases. Now, you're going to know that we're going to create a database, and your database is different than a database table. So just so you know, a database will have something to the name of maybe like blog. We'll call it it'll be the blog database, right? So we'll create a database for a blog, and we're going to connect Laravel to that database, all right? Now, within that database, we can store lots and lots of information. What we like to do is we like to kind of save chunks of related information into tables, okay? So within the table, this is like the database is a collection of a bunch of tables, and then a table is basically like a spreadsheet. So within this, we're going to have a table that's going to be probably called posts, right? You got to spell that right. But posts. So all of our posts are stored in the posts table. All right. Now we might also have a users table. You might have a categories table and a tags table. We'll have all these different tables, and you can have multiple tables in one database. Okay. So that's why I want to clarify, make sure we know that. When I say database, I'm talking about all the tables together. When I talk about a table, I'm talking about a specific one. Now in Laravel and most MVC programs, a model relates to a table. Okay, so you'll usually create a model, and the model is how the program talks back and forth, sets information, and gets information from a database table. okay, is through a model. You'll normally have a model for each table in your database. Now, there are exceptions, but for the most part, you'll have one model for each table, okay? And if that's going to be kind of the general rule you have. Once again, there are exceptions, so don't comment saying that there's an exception, because there are exceptions. But as far as where we are right now, and from a beginner's mindset, let's just think about it as one model for one table in a database. So for your posts table, we're going to have a model called post. All right. Notice it's the singular version, and so just post like this. Post. It's the singular version with a capital letter at the top. All right, at the beginning of the model. So we have a post model that relates to a posts, plural, posts table. Okay. So I want to kind of create this in your guys' brain so everyone's thinking about the same thing. Next, we have within our tables are made up of columns and rows. Okay, so we'll have columns, sometimes abbreviated COL. That's a column, and a column is basically it's a piece of information. Okay, and I'm gonna visualize this in a second, but it's a piece of information that we want to store. So if we want to store in our post column, we're going to want to store, obviously, the title of the post, right? That's going to be a column in our database table. Inside the table is the title. We're also going to have the body. That's another column that we store. And then when we start creating entries, what we're going to end up doing is creating a row. And a row is basically an entry into the database. Once again, we're going to see this in a moment here. But it's a specific entry into the database. Or into the table, I'm sorry. Into the table. All right? And then we'll have like a spreadsheet format, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so I want you guys to kind of see this. Next, I'm going to go ahead and kind of do what we just talked about. So let's call this spreadsheet here. This is basically our table, and we're going to call it our posts table. Okay, so this would be like this. Posts would be the name of our table. And then we would have basically a bunch of columns. Each column is a piece of information we store in our table. Now, one thing we always store is something called ID. Now, ID is basically, you'll have this in every table you create, unless you have a very specific reason not to. But by default, Laravel will actually add this in here, and it expects you to have an ID. Now, an ID is basically a simple number. We basically number the rows 1, 2, 3, and so on, and every number is going to be unique. What this means is you can never have another number 1. Even if you have a number 1 row and you later delete the row, so it's not in the database, the database is never going to come back and create another number 1. It's only going to add it incrementally to the next number, and there'll never be another number 1. Okay, and so this continues on forever. You could have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of rows in a database table, and the ID will continue to increase and never repeat. Okay, so we always have this item called an ID. Next, for our posts table, we mentioned how we wanted to have a title. So we're going to create a column called title. And you also probably have your main body of the blog post, which will be the body. Okay, so we'll have a column for body. And for right now, I think we're going to keep it at this. We might add some more later as we start working with tags and categories and authors and stuff like that. But for right now, we're just going to have a title and a body, just to keep it easy for learning. And then the other thing that Laravel kind of expects, and it's a really good idea to have, are what we call timestamps. Now, a timestamp is basically just when the row was created or the entry was created. Sometimes row and entry are used synonymously, meaning they're the same thing. So you'll sometimes hear me say the word entry and sometimes row. Just know they're the same thing, okay? With timestamps normally consist of two columns. Two columns, yep. We usually have a created at that's usually written like this. So it's created _at. And then you normally have an updated at. And these are generally, both of these columns together make up what we call timestamps. Okay, so this would basically these would be the columns for our posts database. So let's go ahead. We're just going to bold those there. So these are what columns are. So everything in this column is an ID, everything in this column is a title, and so forth. Then when we create entries into our database, when we write a new blog post, we'll create a new entry, which creates a new row. The row will be given automatically a new ID that's unique and unused and increments up. And then we're going to add the information that we have. So in this case, we have a title. So let's say that we wrote in my first title was the name of our title. And then we had body, which was something awesome. This is a blog post, okay? And we would store that in the database under the title. Let's say it was created it's 10:44 right now. So it's 10:44 a.m. And so then we would automatically fill in the timestamps, both timestamps, to be the time the entry was created, 10:44 a.m. Okay, let's say I go back through and now I write another blog post, right? So it's going to say my second title is, or whatever I decide to title it. This is another awesome blog post. And then let's say we create this 15 minutes later, right? So it's going to be 10:59 a.m. and 10:59 a.m. And you can see how every time we submit a new title, we're creating a row. Remember, this is a row, this is a row, this is a row, or an entry into the database, okay? And so I want you to think about this. Columns and rows. Columns are the information that we're storing, right? And then a row is basically a specific entry that we want to recall later. Now, just to kind of show this later, let's say it was 10:59 and I created this second title. And then a minute or two later, so 11 a.m., I remembered, oh shoot, I need to change the title. I'm just going to call this my title instead of my first title. I'm going to edit that. Well, when we edit this, what we do is it updates our updated at time, right? So let's say it was 11:01 when we updated that. The created will stay the same. The created never changes once it's set. This is when the row was first created. And the updated will be every time we make an edit or change to that row, only to that row. Notice how this one doesn't change because we didn't update that row, but this one does. And so then the updated will be changed to whenever that was last updated. Pretty simple, right? Okay, so that's kind of how the databases work, and that's going to basically sum up how we're going to create this database. Well, now let's go over to Laravel and let's take exactly what we created here and work with it in Laravel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's go ahead, open up our terminal, and it's on my other screen here. We're going to cd into sites where I've got just go to your project. This is where I've stored my project. I've called it blog. Now we're in our blog folder, and you should know the trick. So you're going to open it up in your text editor, in this case Sublime for me, and here we are. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to still use the terminal. So keep your terminal open, and we're going to use a handy little we're going to use a handy little trick to automatically generate a model for us to work with our database. All right, so what you can do here is you can go into your PHP Artisan. Remember, like this, when we do PHP Artisan serve, we're using the Artisan commands. That's why we use PHP Artisan. We're using the Artisan commands, and we're telling our terminal to use PHP language to translate the Artisan commands. So that's why I write PHP Artisan and then the command here. Okay, so there's an awesome command we can use Artisan for, and that is for generating a migration for us. So we do our PHP Artisan, and instead of serve, we're going to use a new command, and that's make. And we're going to start using make a lot more because make saves us a bunch of time. Make allows us to automatically generate things like controllers, models, even views and migrations, and all sorts of other things automatically. So it saves us a ton of time, and that's what we're going to use to generate our model today. So what we would do is we just say make model, and then we give it the name of the model we want to create. In this case, it's going to be post. All right, so remember when I mentioned before that the name of your model is going to be the singular version of your table and with a capital letter? Well, that's what we do here. So we're going to correspond to a posts table, which we haven't created yet, but we're going to make one, and we want to call the model post, singular with a capital P. All right, now if I click enter, this is actually going to go ahead and create a model for us. However, I actually want to do one other thing, and I actually want to create something called a migration. Now, migration is a way for Laravel to actually create our database tables for us. This is really useful. This is basically, we're going to see it in a second, and I think it'll make more sense, but just know that migrations are how we create and edit database tables. Now, there's two ways you could go about this. The old school way, where I used to do it when I first learned to program, was we would actually go to the database, create a table in the database, and create the columns and everything in the database, not using any of our PHP or anything like that. We would just create it inside the database, and then we would go to our PHP framework. We would just simply connect to the database, and then we would just start using that table that we had already created and that was created independently of the database, of the framework. Well, now it's really cool because frameworks are getting smarter, and Laravel is one of these smart frameworks that have migrations. And migrations allow us to basically edit the database table through the framework, which is a big time saver. And it's also very useful if you start sharing this code with your friends, because or coworkers or whatever, because they can simply run these migrations and get the exact same database that you have. All right, because it was created in the framework, and Laravel can recreate the framework, the table as well. There's other things we'll learn about migrations that make them even more awesome. I won't get into it now, but you'll see those coming up. Okay, so we're going to do post, and then we're going to tell it migration, and this just means to create a migration for the posts table as well. You can also just, the shorthand for migration is just do a single dash and then M. Or you can do the double dash and migration. Either one will work. Okay, let's go ahead and click enter. You can see it created the model successfully, and then it said created a migration. And the migration has a timestamp here, and it called the migration create posts table. So it knows we're going to create a table for posts. So it's really, really smart. Okay, let's come back over to Laravel, and let's go ahead and just take a look at the model we created. So we're going to go under app. And then if you remember from the beginning of when we looked at the file structure, part 1 of this whole series, I mentioned how user was a model. And that's what we have here. You can see that we've now also created a post model as well. And post looks very similar, but it has a little bit less information because the user model's already basically kind of been created for us. And this is more of like a skeleton model. Just like with controllers, you can see here that we've created a class. It's called post, and it extends model. And so what this means is there's a ton, even though there's nothing in here, just by having this and extending model, we have access to a ton of really useful things. Soon what we're going to be able to do is commands in our controller. We're going to be able to do things like this. We're going to be able to do things like post all, like that. And it's going to pull every post that we've created from our database with one little thing like that, because in our model we have a command called all that drags everything out of the database. We can also do things like where let's just say title. If you want to find a specific title, you could do like where title equals my first title, and it would pull first title. Gosh, guys, can't spell today. And it would pull that thing from the database, right? Well, we would do one other thing. We would do get, like that. Then it would pull from the database, right? So we're going to learn some of these commands down the road. Well, in the next video, we're going to learn these. But basically know that that's what we're inheriting by just having, by extending model, is all these, there's a whole bunch of commands that we're going to gain that are very, very useful. And all that comes in our model. So right now, even though we don't have anything in here, it's still incredibly valuable, and the model already has a ton of power to add and remove things from the database and work with the database a ton. Okay, so that's our model as it is right now. Now let's go ahead and take it the other file that we created, which is the migration. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and actually just cut off the video here. I actually planned on talking about migrations in this video, and I went ahead and filmed it, and by the time I was done, the migrations got a little more complex than I expected, because I kind of forgot we had to we had to get connected to our MySQL, we had to set Laravel up to connect to our database, and there were a bunch of other things that we had to go into in addition to explaining migrations. I kind of forgot about the setup that was required for those, and we will get into all that in the next video, but it turned into such a large chunk that I decided to break this. Instead of doing models and migrations in one video, I decided to separate them out. So this was all about models. Now we're going and creating our first model, and that's what we did here. We're basically now done with our model as of right now, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to continue this in the next video, and it's going to be about migrations and getting our migrations set up and learning more about that migration we just created. And then we can actually start adding stuff to our database in the video that follows, okay? So coming up is all about migrations. Guys, migrations are awesome. I absolutely love migrations in Laravel. They're easy to work with, and we're gonna actually talk, we have a ton of information, like a ton of information about migrations in the next video. It's gonna be a bit long. I think it might be close to a half hour. So get your thinking caps on and get ready to learn. We are going to really be learning a lot in the next video, and we're going to get MySQL set up and all of our migrations and connect them to Laravel and get them to start actually talking to each other. So good stuff coming up, guys. Stay tuned. Thanks a ton. Subscribe if you haven't. Stay up to date on the newest videos. Also, if you do like these videos, go ahead and like them. And if you have questions, feel free to comment. I've actually really been enjoying helping you guys. I've actually really enjoyed helping you guys that have questions. So feel free to comment below, and I'm trying to basically comment to reply to anything that you guys ask me. So feel free to do that. Okay, I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.